Greetings. In this segment of the MOOC, we're going to be joined by Dr. Willie Elliott, a faculty member in the School of Social Work and a leading expert on child savings accounts. He's also the director of the Center for Assets, Education, and Inclusion. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Great. So I thought we would start our interview by having you help us to understand the center that you direct, telling us a little bit about the mission and the work that you're doing.
The broad mission of the center really is just to help solve the issue of poverty, right? We take a particular approach to it because of the intervention we think could best help people solve poverty, and that is we focus around assets. And so we have really 4 buckets of research. One is around children's savings accounts, which we're going to talk a lot about today, but we also focus around college debt or debt more broadly, and then financial inclusion, and in wealth inequality. So those are the 4 buckets, which are all related to one another, but we have different directors under each spot, and that's our broad areas of research that we do.
Could you say a little bit more, maybe like one sentence about, we're going to be talking about child savings accounts, but a little bit more about the work you're doing around debt and the work you're doing around financial inclusion and some of the other buckets of research you talked about?
For sure. A lot of our wealth inequality work, I'll start off with that, is led up by Dr. Emily Roshauer at the University of Kansas. She's now moving to Brown University. And it has focused around really looking at racial wealth gap. And so we do a lot of research around how large the racial wealth gap is, who's affected by it, are college-educated people affected by it. So does having a degree really eliminate inequality, right? Is it a solution in of itself, which ties into our other research around children's savings accounts and college debt. Our work around college debt really has focused, again, primarily on the financial effects after college. So does having debt increase or decrease wealth accumulation among college graduates? It really was kind of a unique question to ask, because a lot of the education researchers and economists, when they've thought about college debt, have thought about whether or not a student who goes to college is better off than if they didn't go to college. So the comparison group becomes whether or not comparing someone with a college degree, someone with a high school degree. One person has debt, and the other one doesn't have a degree. And so in that case, and that's an important question too, because it says education matters on some level, right? But the equity question, which we're really focused around at the center, is how do we create equity? How do we create equality? Not in outcomes, but in opportunity, right? And in the question of whether or not you compare a student with debt who graduates to a student without debt who graduates, and what are their outcomes? And that really is the equity outcome. And whether or not education can act like a true equalizer, we in America think it is, right? We think of education as being this great equalizer. If you start off behind and you go to college, you'll be able to achieve similar outcomes. So then it becomes a thing of only effort and ability to some degree, right? But what we're finding is that that's not the case, actually. That even getting a degree, these kids, these young adults, are falling behind other students, whether they have college debt or whether they start off. Our wealth inequality research has looked at initial assets, for instance. Does initial assets matter for the kinds of outcomes you can achieve as an adult? And the evidence is clear, it does. Same thing with income, right? We also look at initial income levels, and then how much income, whether or not someone's income produces the same amount of assets later in life, right? So even income can be unequal, right? We talked about education. The college degree doesn't pay off the same for everyone. We looked at income, and there's income differences as well, right? So the same dollar gets you less assets as a Black American than it does as a white American, for example, right? And so these are the kinds of questions that we begin to think about within our work. And the financial inclusion piece of it really has to do with making sure people have access to children's savings accounts, financial knowledge, and these kind of things.
Great. So so you've already mentioned the work around child savings accounts. So I'm wondering if we can spend a little bit of time understanding your work in this area, and first by maybe just talking a little bit about what child savings accounts are and why they're needed.
Yeah. So as we talked earlier about kind of the bigger problems of creating equity, right? And so really what children's savings accounts are meant to do is kind of reconceptualize how we think about higher education and financial aid in particular, with an equity lens. And so the idea right now is, often when we think about financing college, we think about its role as being, when you go to college, do you have enough money to pay for college, right? And if that's your only thought, then it might not matter how you pay for it, right? And so whether you're paying for with college debt or any other way, it doesn't really matter, because all the problem is you don't have enough money to pay. And what children's savings accounts begin to do is think about early on in a child's life, all the way to post-graduation, right? And so we talk about an opportunity pipeline. And CSAs really are designed to affect children all along the opportunity pipeline, which has to do with prior to school years, college enrollment, college completion, and in post-college financial health. And specifically what children's savings accounts are in a very basic way, they're bank accounts. Right? Now, hopefully they're investment accounts. They really, depending upon the type of CSA, type of children's savings account program that you're in, some use the banks to deliver these accounts, and some use the 529 system, the state 529 system, which is under the federal, the tax code, right? And it gives you tax benefits and stuff. But importantly, when you have a CSA or children's savings account that is in a 529, you earn interest, like you do in a 401k or whatever else, right? Not just interest, but they're investment accounts, so they're put in stocks and bonds, whatever else. So let me give you a quick model to explain what CSAs are. Maine, the state of Maine, has a children's savings account program run out of a 529. Every kid born gets $500 in that account, right? Now, if we're really talking about equity, I'm moving along here in our discussion. One could argue, and we argue at AEDI, that those need to be progressive. In other words, have it on a scale of how much low income get to high income. But nonetheless, Maine provides every kid born with $500. Now you ask, how's that paid for? The OWL Fund, it's called the OWL Fund College Challenge. OWL Fund was a shoemaker in Maine, and he donated money to every kid. So there's about 12,000 kids born every year. They get $500 put into their account automatically. And they get up to $250 in match. And so for every dollar they invest, another dollar is put in, up to $250 per year. And there's about 80,000 kids right now with accounts in Maine like this. And so you can see the idea is to help families start really early. It starts from birth, these accounts. Sometimes the programs start in kindergarten, but oftentimes at birth. In the case of Maine, it starts at birth. And they're able to accumulate that wealth over their lifetime. If they save $50 in that account, every month until they turn 18, they'll have roughly $40,000 in that account at that time, right? Now, there are issues around whether or not every family can save $50, because that doesn't sound like much. But think if you have 2 or 3 kids, it can become even more, right? I mean, $50 itself could be a lot for some families. But then if you factor in, you have 2 or 3 kids, maybe it's $150 a month that you're really putting into the accounts, which can be constrained. When we talk about innovations later on, we can talk more about that and how to solve some of those problems.
I'm curious about, so with your work in Maine, are you learning, what are you kind of learning as a result of some of the research that you've been doing about what Maine's been trying? Is it helping to address issues of educational equity or college financing?
So, you made a little bit of a jump.
Okay.
But we are doing research in Maine.
Okay.
So before I was just telling you the model of Maine, but we are actually doing some research in Maine. We've just starting to collect a lot of the data in Maine. We have data from other places. But with regard to Maine, we've looked at their savings outcomes in particular, and we find that several things. So let's not just say Maine in this level, because we have research in Indiana. There's a program called Promise Indiana, San Francisco, Oakland, New Mexico, and looking at in a number of other places, looking at the collective of the data around savings, we find that in these accounts, about 48% of the families make contributions on the high end. It can range from 8% to 48%, right? And it really depends upon whether it's an opt-out program or opt-in program, with the exception of Maine. They have particularly high savings rates for an opt-out program. And that's because everybody's included, right? And where other programs, people are self-select in, and you tend to get a little bit higher savings rates. But in either case, probably not enough savings as much as we want. But in both cases, far more than we have nationally without CSAs.
Okay.
So you have to, it's like a scale there on how you think about it. If you're looking at comparing it to without CSAs, this is a lot more savings,
Sure.
but obviously not reaching our goals. But to your point, what we found in Maine is that families, even low-income families, can and do save in these programs, right? And initially, when we started thinking about CSAs, this was a major question. And to a large degree, the Center for Social Development at Washington University did a lot of work around that particular question: can the poor save, right? Because the first argument for people is, should we even bother giving them these accounts because they can't save anyhow? Right? Poor people don't have enough discretionary money to save. But we find that a lot of families can save and do save. So that's step one. But that not all families save, and they save small amounts of money if they're low income. So they're saving, but it's small amounts of money. So, but if they put it into these investment accounts, it builds over time. So you have that. And the other thing is Bobby, getting to your question. A lot of my early work was around how then can we, is there any value to small dollar accounts, right? If these low income families are saving small amounts of money and you have initial deposit that's relatively small, can you produce, is that worthwhile? Is that a good investment? And what we found was that even these small dollar accounts, which most of the CSAs at this time are small dollar accounts, can produce a lot of positive outcomes. For example, in early education, we see that it produces higher social emotional development, which we know is very predictive of later academic achievement, right? And this is done through, this evidence comes not from our research, but from the Center for Social Development, which is running a randomized controlled trial. So this is some of your more rigorous types of analyses, and it still is shown that having a CSA produces higher social emotional development among the families. It also reduces maternal depression, which is somewhat surprising in some ways. And part of the effects on social emotional development are mitigated. 50% of it's mitigated. The effects of hardship on social emotional development is mitigated by having a CSA. So, which is interesting, right? So let me restate that one more time. The effects of hardship, 50% of the effects of hardship on kids' social emotional development is mitigated by having a CSA. Now you might ask, this is getting to the small dollar thing again, they're not actually getting in this money. One of the things I didn't mention about CSAs, they're for this long-term goal of going to college, and you can't touch the money until you get to college. So how can it mitigate hardship, right? And basically it's around the family's perceptions about the nature of the hardship, right? That their kids still have opportunity even though they're in these circumstances. So it reduces the negative effects of hardship. Now, I'm not advocating that we don't also have to address the hardships, but it begins to explain some of the effects of CSAs and their potential beyond, and I'll be quick, social emotional development, maternal depression. We also see that it increased in college enrollment, increased college completion. Kids who have assets early on have more diversified asset portfolios later on in life, which is really important when we begin to think about strengthening the return on a degree, right? We have to have these families be able to maximize their degrees. And so CSAs can have positive effects all along that opportunity pipeline I talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about policy being shaped through a lens of opportunity. And it's just interesting to think about even the perception of opportunity, has these positive effects.
No, absolutely. And that is one of our main goals. Is oftentimes right now the conversation around poverty is about economic stability, right? And even like institutes like Pew Research Institute had this large economic mobility framework and research agenda, but then they started talking more about economic stability once we went through the Great Recession, right? Everybody's focus is on stability rather than mobility. And I'll just give you a side note. I do a lot of work with the Federal Reserve banks, and I was talking to one of my friends at one of the Boston Federal Reserve Bank, and he was saying that, my main goal right now, given the current economic climate, is just to maintain where I'm at. And then I said to him, that really is okay for you and I, but for a poor person, the idea of economic stability really is not a great one. Do I really want to maintain my current status? No, I need to be able to think that I can partake in all the riches of kind of America, right? That opportunity to see your kids do better than you do, right? And so I don't think we can lose focus, even in economic hard times, even though things are shifting. We have to focus on mobility, because we're a country about the American dream, that every kid, through his effort and ability, can achieve great outcomes. But our system, our structures, our institutions have to provide that opportunity, right, to make that a reality for all kids. One of the things I really hate in the data is too often we see patterns of inequality, right? We're not trying to advocate for anything other than the American value of economic, that effort and ability should lead to desired outcomes. My point is, we're not trying to say equal outcomes, right? We understand that some people are going to work harder than others, some people have more ability than others, and they're going to achieve different kinds of outcomes. But the problem is we see too many patterns of inequality, right? Where the same people fall into the same patterns over time. And to me, that speaks of an institutional problem or structural problem and not an individual problem. That doesn't mean that individuals don't have things to work on, but it does mean that our institutions aren't working in the right kinds of ways. Because in the end, you and I, though we look different, we're born the same, right? On some level. And so we should, then what should determine our outcomes is our effort and ability. And right now we don't have a system that does that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's terrific, and raises a number of issues that we've been talking about throughout the MOOC related to the complexity of policy issues, the interconnectedness of policy issues, and so really what I really like about the conversation we're having is also really shifting to think about access to opportunity and the ways in which policies like child savings accounts provide that opportunity and really frame equity in an important way. So I'm curious, you started to talk a little bit about different models of child savings accounts, and I know you have lots of ideas about potential solutions. So I'm wondering if you could spend a little bit of time telling us about where you see the future of child savings accounts and also some kind of potential adaptions or innovations that you're seeing from your own work.
Now you get into the kind of exciting part, right? And I think that AEDI at the University of Michigan is leading the charge in some of those areas. The traditional model of CSAs, as I described in Maine, oftentimes is not progressive, right? And oftentimes is small dollar accounts where they're putting $500 in, or sometimes $25 or $5 in Lansing, Michigan, right? And so, and there's a tension there, right? Because part of so the biggest tension is with regard to real liberals and conservatives. There's another way of putting it, right? So some conservatives like the idea of small dollar accounts because they require little investment, and they might see them as long-term solutions for replacing things like financial aid for college, right? We give somebody $5 in their account, we give everybody an account, and then we wipe our hands of it, we're done, right? And so that will not bring equality. One of the things, so I went through these transitions in my own career of just understanding what CSAs are to thinking about how do we have small dollar effects. And now I'm really on the point of a wealth transfer into these accounts, right? And so as an innovation, one of the things I think really needs to happen, because I see these accounts not only as in helping people throughout the education pipeline, through this opportunity pipeline we talk about, but also as a way of tackling wealth inequality, which I see as one of the biggest problems facing our society. And if we don't, and it's one of the, in my opinion, one of the reasons we see all the unrest in society, the Fergusons and the other things that are happening, is because there's this gross inequality with regard to wealth. And so if CSAs are ever going to be a wealth inequality fighter, if you will, they will need to have a wealth transfer and a meaningful amount of money put into those accounts. I have, me and my colleague, Melinda Lewis, have talked about somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,500 being put into these accounts. Somebody like Derek Hamilton, who's an economist, has talked anywhere between $50,000 to $80,000 put into these accounts. And so first thing that comes to people's minds, I'm sure our audience as they're listening to this, is how do you pay for something like that, right? There's several ways. I'll give you a private way, first of all, and I'll tie two things into that. One is on the individual level. with rewards cards. So one of the biggest innovations I think I've seen in the field over the last 15 years is the idea of rewards cards. Now, you're all probably familiar with rewards cards. You're familiar with rewards cards. You go to Kroger's grocery store, they give you a card, you scan it every time, you get certain kind of discounts. Well, Kroger actually has a contract with Community Link to develop these rewards cards rebates. And so what happens is you still get your discounts, whatever the everybody else gets. But in this case, you also get a rebate up to 4% on every purchase. Right now, it's negotiated at 4% at Kroger's. And so every time somebody makes a purchase at Kroger's, they get a 4% rebate, and they've designated that to go directly into their accounts, right? So think about that, right? Now, what's happened here is we've transformed spending into saving, right? And it even counts when you use food stamps, which also tells you it's not a credit card. This is an actual rewards card that has this rebate attached to it. Kroger's does it because they get more marketing, right?
Sure.
So it comes out of the marketing dollars. But from our standpoint is a family can earn up to $600 per year in these kind of benefits. And then they can also round up to an additional $300, which is $900 a year. And as I already told you, if you put this money into the account early on, it's going to build up over time. So this is something that families can do, that we can begin addressing these savings rates, because the argument for low-income families is, and even liberal researchers are sometimes worried about putting money into CSAs and not into other income-based programs because you got to provide for your basic needs, right? And these families don't have enough money to provide for the basic needs, and we're asking them to save. Well, we've kind of eliminated that with the rewards cards, because now all they got to do is do what they have to do anyhow, and that is eat. And so to me, this is a much better model. There's been tweaks around the model, behavioral approaches, and trying to, but to me, this institutional kind of approach of changing the spending and the saving is the way to go. Now getting back to my wealth transfer, they've also done this at the city or state level, and we could think of it at the federal level. And they've done this through the government P cards, which are government credit cards. And so essentially, so an example, this would be in Long Beach, California is doing this now. And so Long Beach, the city of Long Beach, they've tied it to their P cards, and every time they make a purchase, they get a rebate. Not 4%, it's much lower, but every time they make a purchase, they get this rebate. It goes into a general education fund that's then can be put into these CSAs. And they've estimated up to about $15 million a year off of this program. So it's a fairly substantial amount of money that's kind of out there. And it has to do with the inefficiencies in current P card models. They still get to keep the same P card they've been using, but they've developed a way to get rid of the inefficiencies, which create that extra bit of money that can then go into these accounts. And if they're able in that little city, if you define it little or not, but that city to raise $15 million, right? Now, and there's all these other places we could do that and actually create money for this. So that's one model. And I think we should think about all these things. And what I'm giving you here is a progressive agenda for asset building, right? I mean, you look at Democrats now, they have no idea what an agenda is for solving wealth inequality, and I'm trying to provide you with one with a number of steps. You have an account that provides you all these benefits, even if you don't have lots of money in them. So it makes them a great vehicle for a wealth transfer, which is an American idea. We've done it in the Homestead Act, we've done it in the GI Bill, and it has great economic turns. Everybody will talk to you about trickle down, right? But you can also build an economy from the bottom up, and nobody talks about that, right? And so by having this wealth transfer, it's not just a giveaway, but it also builds the economy. And so now I've given you an account, I've given you ways for the individuals to save in this account more efficiently, and then we're giving you a way even for communities to provide. Now beyond that, some programs like in Indiana are beginning in Kansas and in Oakland are beginning to think about their scholarship money, right? So why, if you have scholarship money, and you give it to a kid when they reach 18, why not put it into their account early on? It does two things. First of all, or even a Pell Grant, right? We've talked a lot about Pell Grant. Even the college boards talk about now about putting a portion of the Pell Grant into these CSAs early on. But this is money we already have allocated towards education, and it's billions of dollars. Put this money into the kid's account early on. Let it grow over time. Why is that important in of itself? Now, I don't have direct research on this, but I'm going to give you a personal anecdote. I grew up very poor, homeless at times, you know, all the things that poor kids experience. And then, first time I wanted to buy a car, right? I didn't have good credit. I didn't have any money down. Me and the car dealer knew that I had to get a car from a place that would give credit to a person like me, right? The power, bargaining power that one has in those situations is very limited. I go to buy a car today, my car's paid off, I have money. We both know I can go to any lot in the area and get a car. That's capitalism. That's not bad or good. It just is. And we have to somehow give these kids that same kind of power growing up, right? They're not going to be able to buy everything, but they have to have a sense that I have my own assets, that I can negotiate. The schools have to look at them and say, this is an actual potential person who could come to my school one day as a college student, right? So I think there are many reasons for doing this, but we can take these scholarship monies. I'll say one more thing about the scholarship money. I think it's a really important point. When I went to college, having my background, I graduated from Washington University, which is a very selective PhD program. I took an MSW there too. I graduated my PhD in 3 years, which is really unusual. And a lot of people ask why. Well, I did have a family at the time, so there's some practical reasons. But beyond that, you grow up poor and something always happens before you get to go to the movies or whatever it might be. And so economists oftentimes talked about future orientation as being born with it, right? Some people are born with a future orientation. And that's probably true to some degree, but a lot of it is developed through our experiences, right? If you have experiences all the time where it always fails. And so when I ran through the PhD program, I just could never believe that I could make it to the end, that something would happen, right? It wouldn't be my effort. It wouldn't be my ability, but it'd be money. It'd be something else, right? I went bankrupt as an MSW student, right? So you just have all these concerns. And so my point is with the scholarship is, yeah, for most people, you give them a scholarship down the line and that's real, that's tangible to them in some kind of way. But for that low income person, they don't know if they're going to live that long. That sounds like hyperbole, but it's not. There's real, or they think a million other things are going to happen that they're not going to get there. And they have evidence in their everyday lives to teach them that. And so by putting that scholarship money in there early on, you change bargaining power, which is just tremendously important. But then you also give them that sense of security that people go. Why do rich people think they're going to go to college? Their families tell them they know they're going to go to college, right? What we find in the CSA evidence is the effects are much stronger for low-income families than it is for high-income families. Why? Because a high-income family person already knows they're going to be able to pay for college. So what's the CSA really doing for them? It did provide some things for them, don't get me wrong, but the effects are much weaker, sometimes not even non-existent, but they're strong for the low-income family because they don't have a strategy for paying for college. They need one, right? And so I went on and on, but so to recap, you have an account, which to me is the best vehicle we have for a wealth transfer. You actually put a wealth transfer in that account, and we have ways to do that through rewards cards, which families are contributing, which fits our American values, right? It's not for nothing. And then we also have ways for communities to participate. And then I think you could round that out with some other types of income programs, because we live in a highly technological world. I think America is totally ill-equipped for the new world that's coming. And what I mean by that, there was an article in the New York Times, and I've written a paper about this recently, but I'll give you the simple example, is in Sweden, the coal miners are not afraid of losing their jobs or innovation because they have such a social welfare safety net that they know that if I lose my job, I'm still going to be able to retrain, my family's going to be able to live and eat and make enough money, I'm going to be okay. I can live through this transition and it's not a scary, bad thing. In America, that's a very frightening thing, right? Because you know that if you don't lose that job, there's nothing there for you and for your family. And so that makes Sweden much more able to innovate moving forward, particularly in the world we're coming in, which we know that, for instance, we test them right here in Michigan, there's going to be driverless cars. We're going to lose millions of jobs. And yeah, there'll be jobs to replace them, but those individuals who lose those jobs, it will take a decade to retool and get them into other good jobs. And are we in a position, what is that going to do to wealth inequality, right? What is it going to do to income inequality and all those other kind of things? We're not prepared for it. We don't have, and so I'm not against people working. I think people should work. But we have to be realistic about the time in which we live. It's not the Homestead Act where you're going to say, I'll give you a piece of land and you can go out there and work it. You have to have machinery, you have to have technology, you have to have all these other things to make it a productive piece of land, or else you just got a piece of land that will be actually a hindrance to you because you won't be able to produce enough out of it, right? And so we have to have a new way of thinking about the road. And if America doesn't adapt, and what I'm trying to provide, and I say I, really not I, a lot of other people working in this field, right, is a way, one way, and it has to be married with other things, of beginning this process of creating an American society that still has its American values of effort and ability, where people are contributing, but it allows us to transition into this new world we're about to head into, and we're ill-equipped for. Our policies are ill-equipped for them. Our way of thinking, that small government, right? You're going to need government in your life. That's not non-American. That's going to be a necessity. And if we don't adapt to that, we'll fall behind. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
It also seems like raising, many of us in social work think about prevention and starting, as you said, kind of from a bottoms-up approach, and yet so much of social policy has been developed as a reaction to issues and trying to kind of put Band-Aids on. And I think, you know, in the policies and the solutions that you're identifying are really about creating not a Band-Aid, but really creating a basis for people to move forward.
You're stealing my stuff. So when I talk about college debt, one of the things we talk about a lot is really treating the symptoms, right? And we talk about it in a Thomas Kuhn kind of way. So he talks about how there are scientific revolutions, right? In that we typically exist in a period of normal science. And that's important, that we have periods of normal science. But what happens is at some point they begin to fail. Like I see this failing coming with regard to the innovations of technology and AI and stuff. But there's other failings within the student debt system. We see it's escalating, right? That there's over $1 trillion in debt, and people, you know, blah blah blah. So you know all the numbers. And I think our politics have helped us to not be able to think outside of that paradigm. And so we have this normal way of thinking about things, and then that makes us try to find strategies that continue to fit into that paradigm, right? And so there's all these things going on. So with regard to student debt, instead of saying, the root problem is financing college through debt in the first place, we do things like create income-based repayment plans, which treats the symptom. What's the symptom? People get mad when they see lots of kids defaulting on their loans, and so we don't want them to default. And so instead of having them default, what we do is we put them in a system in which is going to take them 50 years to pay off, which means, and we have evidence to show, that they then don't accumulate assets at the same pace of other people. And so now we're actually exasperating the problem because we're too afraid to think outside the box and imagine a world in which there's no student debt. We've convinced ourselves that student debt has to exist, and how do we manage it, as opposed to thinking, are there alternatives to student debt, right? And so I think it's where we need to get is we have to, and our political system has created that, right? We see all this gridlock at the federal government, and we think, well, there's no way to get any policies done. So we're just trying to fight on to what we have, right? We just want to fight for what we have. Don't lose your social safety net. Don't lose your your retirement plan or whatever else. Instead of thinking about how do we grow things, this economic mobility piece, this opportunity piece that we talked about earlier, and we are really, I mean, I spend a lot of time in D.C., and this is a real struggle for people, both in D.C. and outside of D.C., of just being able to dream about going to the moon again, right? And creating policies that really can make a difference in people's lives, not just hang on to what we have.
I'm curious, just in thinking about higher ed and student financing, student debt. Are you involved in efforts to also think about college costs and curbing college costs?
No. But I do think it's a reality. So if you're asking me if I'm involved in some kind of way, no. But the college cost thing is complicated. For one, states have systematically retracted all their support of colleges, not all, but a great deal of it. So we like to, this is what American way, is we will point at the football coach making a lot of money or the president making a lot of money, and that is wrong in and of itself. I give you that. But that really is not the driver, right? And so the driver is that states have taken the idea that the individual benefits from college, the individual should pay for it. In the Great Recession, allowed them to pull back, right? Gave them justification for pulling back, and they've never gone back to re-support. In fact, they've doubled down on not, every time there's something comes up, they figure we can cut more from this, which then means schools have to raise their costs. That is not the only thing going on, but that is the main driver of what's going on. And so that's a policy, that's both a value thing and something that can be solved by policy. States have to think about reinvesting in universities and colleges. So I don't spend a lot of time. To me, there's a fairly simple solution to that. States should reinvest, and we should do some oversight on how much people are being paid. But that really is not the driver.
Great. So we've covered a lot of ground in our time today, and I'm just wondering if you could think about. So you're talking about a policy where people can dream, or a practice in which we can dream new solutions and in a different path. And so I'm just wondering if you could help envision the future for your own research. What do you envision, and where do you hope your work heads? What could you?
I think about that in a number of different ways. I think I've kind of given you my broader vision for what I think might be an asset policy, right? An asset policy agenda. I do think that we do need to think about things like a child trust. We need to think about things like full employment, making sure everybody has a job, right? Particularly in a time when, and we'll have to make decisions about, should a robot do this or should a person do this, because we need people to work, right? I mean, I think we're going to have to make practical decisions. Yeah, we could do it more efficiently with a robot, but we need to keep this job for people so they can also work, because that's important for people. So I think there's some of that to go on. If I was thinking about within academia, per se, I really think we need to have a shift away from total value freeness, right? This idea that research is somehow value free. I studied poverty because I was poor, right? I mean, to say anything different would be a lie. It interests me. The questions I ask, how I look at it, are shaped by the values that I have. So I think there's that, right? And to me, that's a better place to be. That doesn't mean that should damage your findings or have you look, but let's just be honest where our values are at and where we're coming from. And I think that's important. Secondly, I think academics need to think outside of academic journals, right? I don't want to, I do the work, particularly as a social worker, right? To have policy impact, to make a difference in poor people's lives, to see poverty go away, not to have another academic publication in a journal. So we have to begin to think about, what do we do as a school? What do we do as a university to take that work and translate it into products that people can use, access, understand? Right? We have to take a significant role in that. Now, so that's academia at large. I think social workers need to regain their sense of advocacy, right? And in much as they wanted to become a profession, they got trapped into value freeness, which kind of meant that you can't now be an advocate in any way or be seen anyhow in that form or fashion. In fact, other academics will call you an advocate if they don't like what you're saying, right? As a way of almost condemning you in some kind of way, right? And so social workers have to understand that they need to begin to take roles in our democracy and help advocate for their families, I mean, for their clients and for their families and communities. And so I think that has to be a shift. It has to be reflected in our curriculum, it has to be reflected in what professors are doing, it has to be reflected in what students are learning, right? All these things. So
Great. I think, you know, we start with social work as a field. If we think about kind of our code of ethics, the international code of ethics, it's not a value free, and so the kind of work you're doing and the kind of issues you're raising are really helping us to think more critically about what we're doing, and I know will inform not only the work that we're thinking about in our school, but hopefully for the folks that are listening and watching us today. Absolutely. So thank you so much for your time and for your insight, and thank you all for watching.
Thanks for the opportunity.